Since we're on the subject of not understanding many aspects of the Torah from a literal point of view, we'd like to draw our attention to a section, chapter 38 of Genesis. For those of you not familiar with it, you can kind of read right through it. It isn't difficult. The English translation seems to be accurate, but of course, according to the Zohar, it is not. The English translation is not. But just to provide you with a little background to chapter 38, prior to chapter 38, we have the narration concerning the sale of Joseph by his brothers into slavery. Okay? And that's discussed in chapter 37. And then we come to chapter 38, where the verse begins, and it came to pass at that time that Yehuda went down from his brethren, because once this happened, and turned into a certain Adulami Ushmo Chira. It says, what does it mean he went down? What does it mean, Vayered Yehuda me'et achav? He went down. What it means is, the Zohar says, because he fell from grace of his brothers, since he was saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. He took her for a wife, and Batavatel ben, and she gave birth to actually 3 sons. The first one was the second one was Onan, and the third one was Shelah. And then it tells us that she ceased to give birth any further. And it says, Vayikach Yehuda isha le'er bechoro shma Tamar. And Judah took a wife for his oldest son, and her name was Tamar. And it says that was the Bechor of Yehuda, was evil in the eyes of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. And then Yehuda said to Onan, the second son, to marry her and to establish children for the deceased, which is called Yivum, the levirate. And it says that Enan knew that there would be no children, and he sinned, and again, he was evil in the eyes of the Lord, and he died. And Yehuda tells Tamar, his daughter-in-law, to return to her father's house until the youngest son, Shelah, shall mature, and because he's afraid that the youngest son, Shelah, the third son, might die, and therefore put it on hold. And it says, and she followed the advice of Yehuda and returned to her house. And verse 12 then says, and in the process of time, Vatamed bat Shua eshet Yehuda, and Yehuda lost his wife. Vayinachem Yehuda, and Judah was confident. And here is the part that we want to discuss. And he went up unto his sheep shears to Timnah, he and his friend Hidha. And it was told to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, Hine chamich ole timnata lagoz sono. I mean, this is all in the Bible. I don't know why, this complete description of where he went. He went to cut, the shear, wool of the sheep. I mean, you're talking about a Bible. You're talking about a document, an important document. And are all these details really that important? Certainly from a literal translation, it's in excess. But in any event, that's what it says. Vatasa bigdei almenuta, and she took off the garments of her widowhood and covered herself with a veil. I want to stress these words. Vatachas batsaif vatitalaf, vatesha bepetach einayim, and sat in the entrance of Einayim, Asher al derech Timnata, which is on the way to Timnah. And why did she place herself in that position, in the entrance of Einayim? Because she saw that Shelah had already matured, grown up, and Yehuda did not present Shelah, the youngest son, to Tamar for her husband. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot. This is, incidentally, the literal translation. Zonah, even in modern Hebrew, is considered to be a prostitute, a harlot. He turned to her, for she had covered her face. She had covered her face, and therefore he did not recognize her. And he came to her, and listen to this story. It's one of I consider the most incredible stories of the entire Bible. Every time I read it, you kind of still feel bewildered that, no, this is a description in this book of Revelation. And he comes unto her. Come, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee. Asking a prostitute. You're talking about Yehuda, right? You're talking about the chariot of the constellations. 12 sons, as you know, were not merely 12 sons of Jacob just to provide us with information that he had 12 sons. But the Zohar learns that all of these 12 represented themselves as the chariots, the link, our link, by making use of these 12 sons, our link to control of the constellations, the signs of the zodiac. And this is Yehuda, who confronts a harlot and says, come with me for the night. And we continue on with this very weird story. Very weird story. And she said, but what are you going to give me? What, do you think this is for nothing? And certainly if she represents herself to be a prostitute, they don't do it for nothing. They do it for a livelihood. Right? And he said, I will send thee goats from the flock. Vatomen, and she said, obviously she was smarter than him. He must have thought he can Jew her in, right? I'll send you something tomorrow.
Checks in the mail.
It's like the doctors, when before they operate, and rightfully so, and I'm not here to discredit doctors, but you've got to pay him in advance, because the guy dies, who's going to pay him? Right? So she understood the same principle, and the Torah tells us, just in case you thought she might have done it for nothing, no. She asked for payment in advance. All right? And he said, I'll send thee a goat. And she said, no, that's not enough. Wilt thou give me a pledge till thou send it? I want you to give me, the Hebrew word is eravon. I want you to give me a security, something that I can hold on to, that in case you forget to send me the things you promised me, like Gedi Izim, and remember that? Gedi Izim, which means goats. She says, give me something. What should I give you? And she said, thy signet, and thy cord, and thy staff that is in thy hand. And the fool gives it to her. Right? And, it's very appropriate. I mean, can you imagine if, I don't want to mention any names, but if this guy, left his calling card, guy who thought he'd run for president, and he left his calling card, that's damaging evidence. Why would Yehuda even think of doing something like that, right? It could turn out to be a disaster. The community would talk about him. Let's say he didn't, Terrible story. All right? Anyway, I guess he didn't think too much about it. Maybe he was, he's like a lie, and they said Yehuda is Aryeh, and then he didn't care what the community would have to say. And he gave them to her and came unto her, and she conceived. And she arose and went away. It says already she conceived. Can you imagine? The Torah is already telling us that she conceived. You might think that maybe the Torah is providing information about what happened afterwards, right? But it says immediately, Vata'alo, she conceived, and then she arose and went away. But maybe the Torah knows that she conceived, right? And so he's telling us in advance. But that doesn't fit in precisely with the story. Anyway, she went away, and she took off the veil from her and put on the garments of a widowhood again. And Judah sent the kids of the goat, he kept his promise, by the hand of his friend, to receive the pledge from the woman's hand, but he couldn't find her. This became serious now, right? He should never have done that in the first place. And he couldn't find her. V'lo metza'ah, and he didn't find her. And then he asked the men of her place, saying, where is the prostitute that was at Einayim by the wayside? And they said, there had been no harlot here. There never was a prostitute there. You just must be living in an illusion, right? Vayeshev Yehuda, he returned to Yehuda, v'yom lo metzatiyah. I didn't find her. And also the people of the town don't recall that there was ever a prostitute. Word is really not zonah. Here already they turned it into the word kedesha, kadosh. But our English translation says harlot. Like I tell the Israelis, can't you be satisfied with what they like? A lot of words for the same thing. We have zonah here, right? We have kedesha here. Which is it? But anyway, the word is kedesha. Kadosh, that's a funny word from the Bible for a prostitute. Kedesha, harlot. That's the way we get the English translation, if you ever buy a reliable translation. Bayomi, there are even unreliable translations, but this is one of the better ones. Bayomi Yehuda, and Yehuda said, Tikach la peniel avuz. Let her take it, lest we be put to shame. I mean, I sent the goat. Now you come back and tell me you didn't find him. And it came to pass after 3 months that Yehuda was told that Tamar, his daughter-in-law, must have been a prostitute. Sure, she involved herself with prostitution, and she is pregnant from this prostitution. And behold, she is with a child by harlotry. Awful. And what's Yehuda's response? And Yehuda said, bring her forth and let her be burnt.
Nice guy.
I guess some of you don't know the story. Maybe you know all the other beautiful things, the Ten Commandments. Can you imagine if Cecil B. DeMille knew about this story? Right? This is an exciting one. 10 Commandments, some listen, some don't listen. All right? What was so exciting about the 10 Commandments? All right? And when she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law saying, by the man whose these are, the signet, the ring, and all of the things that he left in trust with her. By the man whose these are, am I with child. Discern, I pray thee, whose are these, the signet, and the cords, and the staff. Remember those words? That's the one I became pregnant with. And Judah acknowledged them and said, she is more righteous than I.
All of a sudden.
All of a sudden. She's more righteous. First she wasn't righteous. Now what does it mean? Because he's involved, he turns the tables. From a prostitute, she now becomes a righteous person. I mean, that's hypocrisy of the worst class. How else can you interpret that? All right? But Vayomet Satka Mimeni, Ki Alken Lo Netatita L'Shela B'ni V'Lo Yosef Od L'Data. And she is more righteous than I, for as much as I gave her not to Shelah my son. What does that have to do with it? You mean she becomes righteous because he didn't give her to his son? And he knew her again no more. You imagine? I'm surprised she didn't bring him up for a custody suit. Right? Or, not the custody suit. What is that? Claiming paternal suit. Right? This is all literal translations, pretty close to what you might say is one that can understand of what the actual revelation of Torah is about. And it came to pass in the time of her labor, and behold, twins were in her womb. And it came to pass when she travailed that she gave birth. Doesn't speak anymore about Yehuda. He just seemed to have taken the quickest exit out of town, because all he said was, she's righteous, and disappeared. And then the Torah goes on to tell us that she gave birth to 2 children, of which one of those children, whose name was Paretz, was the head of the dynasty of the house of David. And this was David's grandfather, King David. King Solomon's grandfather. Well, if King David had a son Solomon, then it had to be, if it was King David's grandfather, it must have been King Solomon's grandfather, right? Great. Right. Many generations. But this is where the house of David came from. This is the story. Okay? I thought you'd find it interesting. I've read it many a time, and I still find it interesting.
Sounds like to me the constellations of the planets going in and out, but you get the names, Leo and Orion.
Well, let's see what the Zohar says immediately on this verse. And incidentally, you would expect what we're going to. It's a very difficult section, incidentally, very difficult. But the points that will be made will be understood. except getting it really into detail. That requires study of the Talmud Sefirot. But there is enough there for us to walk away from this section with another opinion. The Zohar says, page 94 of Acharei Mot, for those of you who have the Zohar, Rabbi Yisrael Patach, L'saper b'Tzion Shem Hashem utilato b'Yerushalayim. The name, to tell the name in Zion, the name of the Lord, and His praise in Jerusalem. This is a verse, okay? And in Tehillim, okay? Chapter 102. Hashem HaKadosh Satum v'Nigla. Shahanista hu Havaya v'Hanigla hu Adnei. In other words, wherever you see the Tetragrammaton, it is revealing mysteries. It is the secrets of the Torah, and wherever you see the word Aleph Daled Nun Yud, that is referring to the revealed aspect of the Torah. V'atorah shishem HaKadosh Elyon d'Zeir Anpin histuma u'mugula. Everything that is written in this Torah is concealed and also revealed. V'kol pasha shebetorah stuma u'megula, kloma, sheyesh ba pshat v'yesh ba sod. In every sentence, every verse. Shalamadnu. Am Rabbi Yehuda, me'azut shel tzadeket echad yasa kama tovot leolam. Umihi hi Tamar. From this azut, how shall I say azut? One who is, if chutzpah satisfies everybody, all right? From this chutzpah, but it's even more serious than chutzpah, but what? Arrogant even. Chutzpah doesn't, it means kind of nervy. But this is, from this arrogance came much benefit to the world. And who is from this tzaddiket, because Yehuda also confirmed that she must have been a righteous person. So the Zohar is not in conflict with the verse. And this is Tamar. Shekatuv, V'atesha bepetach einayim. Do you remember where she was sitting? If you recall when I read it. She was sitting at the entrance to a place, according to the translation, the entrance of a place called Einayim. But if any of you know a little Hebrew, you know that the word Einayim means eyes. Eyes. What a funny place what a funny name for a place. Eyes. Amar Rabbi Abba, Parsha zu mochicha lanu she'atorah histuma v'gelua. From this chapter that we just read, says Rav Abba, one of the students, the foremost students. In fact, it is Rav Abba who was the scribe who literally wrote down the words of the Zohar, not Rabbi Shimon. He merely transmitted the secrets of the Zohar, and it was Rav Abba who wrote them down. And he says this chapter that we just read is the complete indication that this Torah is concealed and revealed at the same time. והרי הסתכלתי בכל התורה כולה ולא מצאתי מקום שיהיה נקרא פתח עיניים. He says, I looked throughout the whole Torah. Shouldn't the place be mentioned, since it was obviously an important place in Israel? That place should come up again. He says, I've looked through everything and I never saw this place mentioned again. El hakol satumhu v'sod hasodot. But, what's that? Petach Einayim, the entrance to the eyes. Okay?
But I just want to make sure that you make the eye.
V'lamadnu. And the Zohar continues. Ma rata tzadikot zu l'masaseh. What did this tzadikot, in other words, Tamar, who the Zohar concurs with Yehuda, was a righteous person. What did she see from all of this? Umeshiv eliyada bebeit chamiyah. She learned in her father's household, meaning by Yehuda. What's that? Did I say father? Father-in-law. If she's the daughter-in-law, then she's the father-in-law. She wasn't just hanging out, marrying one son after another, says the Zohar, but she was learning the secrets of the ways of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means the Lord, but actually means more than that. What the cosmos was all about. How does the cosmos interact with all the people in this world? Mishum shehiyada hemid HaKadosh Baruch Hu hadavar al yadeha. And because she learned all this, she was destined to bring all of this information to fruition. Can you imagine what's going on? She learned all of the secrets of what the interactions, quant if you want to use that word, between people and the universe. She learned all that, and because she knew it, the Lord himself established everything through her. Mukhanat hayta bat sheva leDavid misheshet yemei Bereshit. Liot imo shel Shlomo HaMelech. And just as we have learned that Bathsheba, the soulmate of David, was destined to be his wife from the very beginning, from the time of Bereshit, from the time of Genesis. She was already destined to be his wife. So there was no question of who David would marry and who the successor of the kingdom of David would be. Afkan, says the Zohar, Mukhanat hayta Tamar lezeh miyom shenivra olam. Tamar was created from the time of Bereshit to reenact and play out and establish what we have just read.
Why didn't she marry him? What does the meaning of a prostitute then?
Well, we'll come to all, just a little patience. It says that she was sitting at the entrance of this place called Einayim. What does this mean, Petach Einayim? And he answers, as it says elsewhere, Vu Yoshe Petach Oel by Abraham, V'katuv V'pasach Hashem ala Petach. It says that Hashem passed over on the entrances where the Jews sprinkled the blood. V'katuv Pisku li Sharei Tzedek. Open for me the gates of righteousness. The word Einayim, Shekol Einayim Shel Ha'olam Mitzapim Lepetach Hahu. We are not referring to a city called Einayim, but we are referring to what the word means, eyes. That all the eyes were on this Petach, on this entrance. She was sitting at the Petach, at the entrance of the eyes. We shortly learn what that means. But it doesn't mean the name of a city, says the Zohar. It doesn't mean the gate of this city called Einayim. But it means the opposite. And it happens to be very nice. What's that? That's what it means. Where all the eyes were looking, mitzapim, were focusing on this particular place. Asher al derech timnata. Now, that doesn't help any of us here, because do you know where Timnah was? Nobody knows.
Oh, sure.
What? Timnah, you mean the Timnah mines? Maybe yeah, maybe no. But in any event, if it says already she was sitting at the, do we have to know where she was sitting? How much do you want to dramatize the story? Is there a limit? It's enough that we've got to go through the story that he wanted a prostitute. Must we have all the details? It reminds me of a Pisces sign. One day, someone comes over to his friend who's a Pisces. He says, "Did you hear the news? They caught this murderer who murdered 4 people in 4 different states." So you think 4 different people in 4 different... He'd get a little excited, the Pisces. What does he say? Which states were it? The emphasis is on which states, right? Not, on the fact that he just murdered 4 people. Right? He wants to know the 4 states. It's not enough that we're learning it, we're hearing it of a narration of Yehuda wanting a prostitute. He's got to give me the details yet, where it happened. So we should always remember where it happened. If we ever come across that location, they probably put up a landmark, right? Like they have landmarks. Remember, this is what happened here, Or George Washington slept here, right? And Yehuda slept here. Oh, that's right, Jack. Yeah, Yehuda slept here, not George Washington, right? So it's not only enough about that, but it's got to say, al derech timnata. That's not enough. Just in case you take the wrong road, know it's on the way to Timnah. Ma'u timnata, says the Zohar. What do we need it for? Hu k'mo she'ata omer, u'tmunat Hashem yabit. That's why Hebrew is beautiful. If the Israelis would only learn how beautiful their language is, they may have a greater affinity and maybe a connection with what goes on with their language. Timnata comes from a word, utmunat Hashem yabit. Tmuna means a picture. No, he's not telling us, which road you take to get to this. Not talking about that. He's talking because the word timna comes from the word tmunat, says the Zohar. וככה העמדנו, Tamar, עמידה הדבר למטה, and as she set down this thing below, where we can read it in this kind of mundane language, and what came out of all of this was a beautiful description of the cosmos. What a connection.
Could that be in a meditation?
She learned something.
That's right. Meditation, right?
It doesn't say that yet. It doesn't say that yet. It doesn't say that. We'll get to it. Now, it does say in verse 15, when Judah saw her, Vayeshev l'zona, he saw her, and he considered her to be a zona, prostitute. How do we deal with this one? This is getting a little difficult. When we were dealing with Petach Einayim, it doesn't mean the entrance to the city. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something of a vision, seeing things. She was at the entrance of the eyes meaning information, ideas. But here it says, he saw her, Yehuda saw her, and he considered her to be a zonah. What is the Zohar going to do with this? It also says, why didn't he recognize her? She covered her face, right? What does it mean she covered her face? Perush. כמו שאתה אומר, אכלה ומחטא פיה, היא שורפת העולם בשלהבותיה, ואמרה לא פעלתי עוון. It's a verse that she eats up everything and devours and destroys everything with a fiery ash. And she says, this is the verse. Where is the verse so you can connect with it? Bet in Mishlei, in Proverbs 30. And she says, Lo palti aven, I didn't do any Any transgressions over here. This is the verse. Mayu atam, u'mishum shechista panel, ve'em mi sheyodea derachel linasel mimena. What it means here, when Yehuda says he didn't see, and she covered her face, is referring to those people who are blind, not literally blind, but see nothing. And then all of a sudden one day they wake up and say, why did this happen to me? What a terrible thing. Where is the Lord? One day they wake up, things turn around. In a moment, in a day, catastrophe. What happened? A lot of people say that. Did it really happen suddenly? Is there something? Because the face was covered, and the face meaning the information of what's really going on. What's really going on in the world of reality, not in the world of illusion that most of us are accustomed to. Because I go along with the psychiatrist. He says we all see 5%. The 92%, he says, forget about it. It's dead. It's dead. Can you imagine operating on a 5% level? How much more is going around all around us that we are not aware of? So when it says here, he's talking about a Tamar, and he's describing not Tamar. He is not describing Tamar. He is describing a situation, not of Tamar the harlot, but describing a situation which burns up, because a harlot does burn up. I don't want to go into that's a lecture on reincarnation. What's so evil? I don't even want to use the word evil. Why it's not practical for a prostitute to be a prostitute. It's not practical. Today, of course, we know it's not practical. With all AIDS going spreading around like wildfire. I mean, it's just not a practical thing. But that's exactly what Tamar was telling us. Not talking about a zona. We're talking about knowing. Knowing, not guessing what'll be tomorrow, but knowing what's going on all the time. Not to wait until it happens. And then, what happened? And what does it say? Vayet elel el haderech. Oh, I didn't even comment on it. It says, and he turned unto her by the way. Right? He saw her. He didn't recognize her. And then he was obviously going somewhere else. And he suddenly veers to the side. That's the way the verse describes it in verse 16. And the Zohar says, Vayet eleh el haderech mamash, lechaber Lavan be'edom. Oh, not even talking about a way, not a road. He's talking about making connections between white and red, which means Lavan ve'edom, and Edom is red. Making connections between positivity and negativity. In other words, we're kind of getting a feeling here, we're not talking about a man seeking out a harlot. Now, what do we do with the next verse? But the Zohar is going to take care of it for us. It says, and he approached her and says, come, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee. For he knew not that this was his daughter-in-law. Vayomer havana avo elecha. What does hava mean, to come? No. Does anyone know a little Hebrew here? We have some people. Hava. Hazmana.
Hava, let's go.
Let's. But it doesn't mean come. Have. Give. But it doesn't mean come.
The contrary.
Give.
It means give.
Hazmana. Abiyur shalma hu b'soken. All right? Ki lo yada ki kalotohi. But what does the verse say? He didn't know that it was his daughter-in-law. Again, are we going to get stuck in the mud? Dealing with the daughter-in-law, father-in-law situation here? No. Hainu ki kalato hi shel ha'olam. Because someone who is ignorant, someone who does not know what Tamar learned in her household, shemitagaminim, because Targum Uklas had it right, shelo yada michla et olam, ki kalahi melashon kilya. I don't want this to sound upsetting, but the word kala in Hebrew means the word for bride. But in Hebrew, that word for kala also means to destroy. I mean, that's awful. But of course, those who have been attending the classes on reincarnation and everything else, you've heard the expression, the best way to kill a romance is to get married, right? You've heard that before, right? I'm only speaking of statistics. You know, like the day before the wedding, the week before the wedding, the month before the wedding, the romance that flourishes, incredible. The day after the wedding, it disappears. I mean, is that normal?
Very normal.
I mean, it's normal for most people, but is it really normal? So maybe this is why we refer to the bride as kala. But in any event, if that does happen, says the Zohar, hatam shelo yoda hu mishum shehayu meirim paneh lekabel mimeno v'nizdamna litvasem v'lerachem al ha'olam. They had seen together that the world was destined to be destroyed, because after the sale of Joseph, you remember we said there was so much negativity in the world. Selling a chariot, Joseph, who was a chariot. Remember this story follows when? The story of the sale of Joseph, if you recall. And there was that consequence almost brought the destruction of the entire world. Almost the end. And what they were trying to do here was restore the world. Ki kalatohi zu kala mamash atei milvanan kala. This was not the way of destruction that without knowing could be destruction, but no, not Tamar. Not Tamar.
The other side of the
She was the other side. She knew. She knew. So the same way as the Gemara says and the Zohar says, just like a woman can be an Ezek Kinegdo, can be a support, and in fact makes Isha Ateret Bala, by the very same token, says the Gemara, Mase Isha Ra Mar Mi Mavet. It's worse than death. What can be worse than death? This is a living death. Death ends in a minute. Having a bad wife can go on for years. So the Gemara, I am not quoting, I quote nothing of my own, you know. So no one can walk out. If you want to condemn what I say, condemn the Gemara, condemn Rabbi Shimon, Chas v'Shalom, or condemn the rest of it. I say nothing of my own here. All right? Sounds like I've got something in for the Torah, right? I mean, the way we're talking, but I'm giving it the way it is. We're not finished yet, because we have to take care of a couple other places. Anyway, ki lo yada ki kalato hi. At that point, he didn't know whether she was kala, destruction, or kala, isha teret bala.
Kalato could mean also his destruction.
That's right. That's right. Vayomer. Now here we come to another sticky point. Mati tenli. What are you going to give me? We learned that it meant payment, right? What are you going to give me, she asked. That you should come unto me. Atasicha hakala tachshitim. Not talking about payment. But just as there is a rule, and I'll explain it. There is a halakha I say, that before marriage, the bridegroom should purchase tachshitim, trinkets and different things. Well, it didn't say exactly. It says takshitim, but do you include diamonds in takshitim also? Okay, it also means that too. All right. Right. He says, since we are coming together to restore the world, because she knew. Remember, she knew. And so she was leading this conversation. Vayomer, oh no, so she said, what are you going to give me? Because she says, the color requires takshitim. Vayomer, and he said, do you recall what he said? Anochi eshlach gedi izim min atzon. I'm going to send you some goats from the flock. Right? From the flock. I'm going to send you later, right? Bidomeh, says the Zohar, lemelech shehaya lo ben mishpacha achat, v'haya holech behechal, ratza hamelech lihinaseh b'matrunutai elyona, uleivia behechalo. He had a son. The king had a son, and he wanted to marry him off. Amra mi natan lezeh behechalo shel hamelech, amar hamelech bikan Allah eshlach ve'egaresh et ben ha'am min ha'echal sheli. He was looking, the king was not looking for just any wife. He was looking for what we call the Shekhinah. What does that mean? What does the Shekhinah mean? It's a term, a Kabbalistic term. But what the Shekhinah means is that vehicle, that channel, that for us, for all humankind, is the channel, the proper channel, and it's a woman, the proper channel by which we can tap knowledge, consciousness, all of the good things that the Creator has in mind. He hasn't in mind anything of a negative nature. Anything that comes our way in the form of negativity, we have already established before, is our own doing, whether it's our doing in this lifetime, whether it's payment for a prior lifetime. But we are the ones that demand that kind of retribution, not the Creator. And so, in his searching to find the right one, it says what? And he brings this mashal, this illustration example about a king who was looking for the right one. When he found the right one, he says, now I can send away what I thought might be something good for my son, right? But now that I've found the right one, I shall egaresh et ben ha'ama min ha'echal shali. It's also talking about, okay, the important thing, I want to go to the next part. Afkan kach, over here, anochi eshlach gedi izim min atzon, v'areyemadnu, ma'u gedi. What is gedi? Is that the only kind of animal he can send? Is only a gedi, which means a goat? No other goats around? He says, below tevashel gedi, shehu hasitra achra hayoneket mimalchut. This may sound, for those who are Capricorns, don't get the wrong impression. But you know what a Capricorn is. I mean, I don't say this, but others say it. No. A Capricorn, but what does the sign represent? What?
Stubbornness.
What is the devil? They usually say that a Capricorn, stingy, doesn't let go of anything. He's not a very charitable man. That doesn't mean that Capricorns can't rise above their sign. But when Avraham Avinu, who wrote the Sefer Yetzirah, discusses, what's that? No. Discusses the sign of Gedi, that's the way he describes it. And that's the way the Zohar describes it. Why? Remember where it says, this is the precept of not to eat lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo. From there we learn that you're not permitted to eat meat and dairy together. And of course the Zohar raises the question in many parts of the Zohar, why does it have to say goat? Let it say basar, meat. From here we learn the prohibition of meat and dairy, that you're not permitted to cook them together. And the answer is, okay, so state that. Why do you have to say do not cook the gedi, not meat, but the goat, b'chalev imo, in its mother's milk? So he says, because we're talking about a situation that when this gedi, or meat in general, what is gedi? What is meat? Why aren't you allowed to eat meat and dairy together? And of course we do not accept, when I say we, I don't mean me, but Rabbi Shimon does not accept that answer that you can get in your shuls or synagogues or temples. You're not allowed to eat meat and dairy together. Why? Because it says so. Show me where it says so. It says nowhere. It says you can't eat a goat. And why can't you eat a goat? Because so it's written. Are we physicists? Do we believe just what is, and we never ask why the Big Bang ever occurred? Why does anything happen? All they want to know is what is. Kacha. We do not accept kacha. An ignorant person accepts kacha. Kacha. So it is. If we are the Am HaSefer, if we are the nation of the book, if we think intelligent people, although we've messed up our lives for 2,000 years, but we still consider ourselves to be smart people, then why wouldn't the Torah want to tell me why? Why not? And so the Zohar says, why does it say, Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo? Why does it mention gedi? Because what is the sign of gedi? To draw to itself. That's the Sitra Achra. That's the other side. That's negativity. Negativity of all mankind. Negativity of the cosmos. That's the intrinsic characteristic of the Gedi. That's what meat's about. Meat has that quality. And what is milk? Milk is the sharing concept. The only time that a cow can give milk is when she has given birth to life. She has shared a life with the world, with the cosmos. She has shared a life. She has provided a body for a soul to become incarnated. So that's what Gedi means, right? So when he was talking about Gedi, he's not talking about making a payment for a goat. We're not talking in those terms. We're talking about knowledge of the cosmos. We are not discussing what kind and what form of payment is he going to make. We are not discussing that. V'kol elu hem ba'im mitzad b'chor behema. Okay? Lo katuv anochi etein, ela anochi eshlach. Taina egaresh ve'shalach oto shelo yimsa be'echali. Therefore it says, it doesn't say, I will give. I will send. In other words, send away, says the Zohar. I will send away this negativity from our household. Has nothing to do with payment for spending a night with her. So we are not discussing payment. We are discussing information about the cosmos. What can destroy the cosmos is something like Gedi. Selfishness, greed. Those are the things that can create destruction. Kalato. Vatomer. We have a problem. Im titein eravon ad sholchecha. She's asking, you remember, for guarantee, something that can guarantee that she will ultimately receive. Right? And I asked not to forget about that. In other words, she wanted some assurance that he would be sending her the payment, but we are no longer discussing sending payment. Then why did she ask for im titein eravon ad sholchecha? So the Zohar says, V'atomer im titein arvacha aravon ashalchecha Elohem hasimanim shel hamalka shenidbarcha min hamelech bezuga. She wanted signs that they were going to restore. They were going to be able to wipe out. Remember, he says, I'm going to remove negativity. What are the signs? Or how can we be sure? Or what are the methods by which we can rid the universe, rid the cosmos of this form of negativity? She's not asking for down payments. She's not asking for guaranteed payments. She's asking for knowledge. What are the signs? Remember, she said, give me an Eidavon, give me a sign that I know that I can get payment, a guarantee. Vayome ma'arebon asher etein lach. What is it that you're asking of me? For us, how will we know when in our own activities, in our own actions, how do we know if they're good or bad? How many times have we done or performed a particular action and it turned out the reverse of what we thought? Oh, I didn't mean it to turn out that way. I didn't mean to hurt you. I mean, doesn't that happen all the time? How can we learn to avoid? Because not for a moral reason. So I want to be a goody-goody. Because we said, by my own negative actions, I bring on me the inevitable result of negative actions. And what is that? Negative retribution. He doesn't send any negative retribution. My action. So she wants to know, how can we be sure about that which we are doing is truly going to be in the course of positivity? Vatoma, and he said, she said, I'm sorry. And she says, Tamar, in verse 18, Chotamcha uvtilecha. I want you to know, I didn't stress it before, but it's worthwhile mentioning it now. It says your signet and the cord. What cord? Piece of string? The word is uvtilecha, which also means wick, petil. What is a wick? A piece of string. Why does she want a piece of string? Umatcha, and also your staff, your makal, makel. Elohem ksherim elyonim tachshitei hakala hamidvarechet min gimel elu. These are code words, secret words, codes. That's sofit. Each word represents, says the Zohar, Netzach, Hod, V'Yesod. That when you can connect to the lower part of the Magen David, the lower triad, and for those of you who are a little familiar with the Magen David, you know it's not just something you put on an Israeli flag or on a Bet HaKnesset, but you know that we're dealing with Magen David, the shield of David. We're dealing with powerful energies to protect us. The lower triad of the Magen David, of the Star of David, is representative of three sfirot, three bottled up energies called Netzach Hod Yesod. V'akol nimsa b'gimel elu, v'akala mitbarechet mikan. And from these three, when you connect with these three energies, what does it say? You remember? Vayiten la vayavo eleh vatalo, and she became pregnant.
Isn't the lower one like the Egyptian? Isn't that the pyramid?
Let's not even inject it. That's negative energy. It's just the opposite. Okay? That's why I have to be very careful about what's being said here. We've had experience. Anyway, it means the lower triad of the Magen David, not anything that is representative of other negative actions. And that which you mentioned deals with how we can take more for ourselves. And then we asked, he gave it to her, he came out to her, and she already became pregnant. And we asked, 1, 2, 3, right? So he says no. When it says he gave it to her, meaning he gave her the signs of how to make these connections, and then there was what? And then what was inevitable when you connect with the lower triad? Vatalo. What does becoming pregnant mean? Growth, enlightenment, new life. Wasn't talking about pregnancy over here.
Isn't that supposed to be the things of your meditation, you give us the letters and the purification, the whole?
Well, the meditations of the Ari can make those connections. All right.
Isn't that the lower?
I'm going to try to bring in this at least one more point. Remember, it says, and after 3 months. After 3 months, do you recall? We asked. After 3 months, he heard the story, and then he says, "Put it to death." After 3 months, Vayeshev. In other words, when you establish the 3 months, what does 3 months mean? Not 3 months. These 3 sfirot. And it says, we'll have to stop here. I'll leave it up. Anyway, I hope, there is another 7 sessions to the full explanation. However, at least what we have learned from this dialogue of Tamar, at least, and from everything else that we discussed this evening, that this book is really a cosmic code and nothing more. It couldn't mean anything less than a cosmic code. Good evening.
May I ask a question?